My HOA bulldozed my lake cabin for bad landscaping. The one I spent 10 years building with my own hands, for my wife. I came home from a doctor's appointment to find my entire life turned into splinters and mud. The HOA president, a woman named Lana, then had the nerve to send me a bill for the demolition. But while she was celebrating getting rid of the hillbilly, she had no idea she and her friends were about to walk straight into my courtroom, lose their HOA, $30 million, and for some, their freedom. When a powerful bully destroys everything you love, how far would you go to make them pay for it? Tell me where you're watching from in the comments below, because this is how you serve justice cold. The quietest time on the lake is just before dawn. The water is glass, the air smells like damp pine, and the only sound is the call of a single loon. For 10 years, that was my church. I built my cabin on that shore, board by board, nail by nail. I'm Tom Reddick. I'm 68, and I used to be a lineman for the county. I spent 40 years climbing poles in storms to keep people's lights on. When my wife, Sarah, passed away, the quiet became too loud in our old house. So I came out here, to the plot of land her grandfather bought, back when this road was just a dirt track. This cabin was supposed to be our retirement. It ended up being my project to keep from going crazy with grief. Every beam I cut, every window I set, I'd think of her telling me, "A little to the left, Tom." It wasn't just wood and nails. It was my last conversation with her. I liked the solitude. I didn't have a Facebook or any of that. I just had my workshop, my fishing rod, and the little dock I finished last summer. The only thing I had to deal with was the homeowners association, which wasn't even a real HOA. It was a road association, meant to handle gravel deliveries and plowing in the winter. I paid my dues, kept to myself, and that was that. But a few years back, a new clique took over the board. It was led by a woman named Lana Dorsey, a retired realtor who moved here from the city and acted like she was the queen of a country club. She and her 2 friends, another 2 transplants, started making up rules that had nothing to do with the road. Suddenly, mailboxes had to be a certain shade of beige. Holiday decorations had to come down by January 5th, sharp. It was silly, but I ignored it. My property was set back half a mile from the main road. They couldn't even see my cabin. It all started on a Tuesday morning. I was walking the property line down by the water, checking for any winter storm damage. That's when I saw it. Bright, chemical orange spray paint. A big X on the trunk of the old oak Sarah used to love. Then another on a smaller pine closer to my dock. My heart started thumping a low, angry rhythm. In my line of work, spray paint on a tree means something. It means it's marked for removal. It's a utility thing, a county thing. This wasn't that. This felt different. It felt personal. I scraped a bit off with my thumbnail. It was fresh. I spent the rest of the day feeling a knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with the coffee I'd had for breakfast. The next afternoon, the feeling got worse. Sticking out of my mailbox was a stiff, cream-colored envelope. Official looking. It had the HOA logo on it. A pine tree inside a circle that Lana's nephew designed. Inside was a single sheet of paper. At the top, in big bold letters, it said, "Final warning." It claimed I was in violation of 2 codes I'd never heard of. First was non-compliant slope grading near a shared watershed. Second was maintenance failure of unsightly brush and natural debris. It said I had 72 hours to comply, or the association would take corrective action at my expense. I read it twice, then I actually laughed out loud. The sound echoed funny in the quiet woods. Non-compliant slope grading? My land sloped exactly the way God made it slope down to the water. It had been that way for 1,000 years. It's called a hill. And unsightly brush? It was a forest. That's what forests have. I crumpled it in my fist. I own the land. Outright. No mortgage. My deed goes right to the water's edge. This HOA, This road fund had zero authority over my property. They can't even spell erosion control. I smoothed the letter back out, put it on my fridge with a magnet, and forgot about it. Just another piece of paper from a busybody with too much time on her hands. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Dead wrong. The following week, on a Monday, I had a checkup at the VA hospital over in Richmond. It was a 3-hour drive each way, an all-day affair. I left before sunrise and got back in the early afternoon. The first thing that hit me when I turned onto my long gravel driveway was the smell. It wasn't pine and damp earth. It was diesel fuel and raw, freshly turned dirt. The air was heavy with it. My old truck rumbled over the gravel, and I felt a cold dread crawl up my spine. I rounded the final bend, where the trees always opened up to that perfect view of the lake, with my cabin sitting right there, smoke curling from the chimney if I'd left a fire going. But there was no cabin. There was just a raw, brown scar on the earth. My heart stopped. I mean, it literally seized in my chest. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a stop. Where my home was, where 10 years of my life stood, there was nothing but churned up mud, splintered wood, and the deep, unforgiving tracks of a bulldozer. The orange-marked trees were gone. The old oak, gone. The young pines, gone. My dock was just a pile of broken planks shoved into the shoreline. It wasn't just gone. It had been erased. Viciously. I got out of the truck, my legs feeling like they were made of stone. I walked to the edge of the destruction. My workshop, with all my tools, my grandfather's old lathe, all of it crushed. I could see a piece of the quilt Sarah made, tangled in a mangled heap of drywall and insulation. It was a complete and total violation. I stood there, the diesel fumes making my eyes water, and just stared. My whole world, gone. Wiped off the map. I pulled out my phone and looked at the time, though I don't know why. It just felt like I needed to mark the moment everything ended. It was week 1, Monday 11:30 in the morning. And my life was a pile of garbage. My first call was to the sheriff's department. I was still standing in the mud, my phone shaking in my hand. It took them 40 minutes to get out there. A young deputy and an older, tired-looking sheriff stepped out of their car. I tried to explain, but my voice kept cracking. I pointed at the rubble, at the raw earth where my life used to be. The sheriff walked the perimeter, kicking at a piece of splintered toxphor. He looked bored. About 10 minutes later, another car pulled up. It was Lana Dorsey. She got out holding a neat manila folder, her face set in a mask of stern concern. She walked right up to the sheriff, completely ignoring me, and handed him the folder. I saw him flip through a few pages. He nodded slowly. Then he walked over to me, handing the folder back to Lana. "Sir," he said, his voice flat, "Ms. Dorsey here has provided a copy of the HOA board vote authorizing the demolition. They say you were sent multiple notices." I held up my hands. "I got one letter. It was nonsense. They have no right to do this. This is my land." The sheriff just sighed. "Look, Mr. Reddick, as far as we can tell, this is a civil dispute. They've got their paperwork, you've got your story. You'll have to take it to a judge." And that was it. They got back in their patrol car and drove away, leaving me standing in the ruins with the woman who had ordered it. Lana straightened her blazer and gave me a tight, fake smile. She reached into her folder and pulled out another one of those cream-colored envelopes. She held it out to me. "This is the invoice," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "for the environmental cleanup and demolition services." I didn't take it. I just stared at her. She placed it on the hood of my truck. "It's $17,900, Tom, due in 30 days. The world went blurry for a second. I had to plant my feet to keep from falling over. She had destroyed my home, and was now billing me for it. I watched her get back in her car and drive off, leaving a cloud of dust that settled over what was left of my life. I picked up the invoice, Attached to it were copies of the compliance violations she'd shown the sheriff. There were dates on them, pictures I'd never seen, and a signature at the bottom from a supposed licensed inspector. The name was Doug Neely. I knew that name. It was her son-in-law. I also found printed emails from the HOA board. They were full of panicked language about my property being an immediate danger to adjacent lots and a risk of catastrophic soil erosion. My land hadn't changed in 60 years. The only thing catastrophic was the bulldozer they hired. I thought, okay, this is insane, but I have insurance. I'd paid my premiums on that cabin for a decade, never missed one. I spent the night in my truck, wrapped in an old blanket from the back seat. The next morning, I called my insurance agent. I explained everything, my voice hoarse. I sent him pictures of the devastation. He was sympathetic at first. He promised to look into it. He called me back 2 hours later. His voice had changed. It was formal, distant. "Mr. Reddick?" He said, "I'm sorry, but we're going to have to deny the claim." I couldn't breathe. Deny it? Why? It was destroyed. He cleared his throat. According to the documentation provided by the Homeowners Association, this was an authorized demolition to remedy code violations. Our policy does not cover what is considered, in this context, a voluntary demolition. Voluntary. They bulldozed my home without my knowledge, and the insurance company called it voluntary. That was the moment the floor fell out. I had no home. I had no insurance payout. And I had a fake bill for nearly $18,000. I was 68 years old, and everything I had built, everything I had left of my wife, was gone, and I was supposed to pay for the privilege. For 2 days, I did nothing. I sat in my truck, parked at a little roadside rest stop, and just stared out the window. The shock wore off, and a cold, heavy anger started to set in. It wasn't hot rage. It was quiet. It was patient. I knew I couldn't fix this with shouting or a phone call. They had a plan. They had paperwork. They had made it look legal. I needed more than a lawyer. I needed a guide. So I started my truck and drove. For 3 hours I headed west, deeper into the Virginia hills, until I got to a small town and a tidy brick house on a quiet street. This was where my friend Mac lived. Judge Malcolm Hayes, retired. I'd known him for 40 years. He was the smartest, toughest man I ever met, with zero tolerance for bullies. I knocked on his door. He opened it, took one look at my face, and just said, "Get in here, Tom. Pot of coffee's on." I didn't ask for pity. I just laid it all out on his kitchen table. The final warning notice, the invoice, the insurance denial letter. I told him the whole story, from the orange paint to the sheriff's dismissal. He listened without saying a word, his steepled fingers covering his mouth. When I was done, the only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. Mac pushed his chair back. "You need to see something," he said. He went to his study and came back with his laptop. He typed for a minute, then turned the screen toward me. On it were court documents, a lawsuit filed against the Road Association 4 years prior, and another one from 7 years ago. Both had been settled out of court. Both had non-disclosure agreements attached. Both involved property disputes, where the HOA had claimed an imminent danger, and then foreclosed or forced a sale. It was a pattern, a playbook. They'd done this before. They'd just gotten better and bolder at it. Mac looked at me. "They're running a racket, Tom. They bully people with paper. Count on them being too scared or too broke to fight back. And then they take what they want." I stared at the names on the screen, 2 other families who had been run over by this same machine. The cold anger inside me finally solidified. It became something hard and clear. I looked up from the screen, met Mac's eyes, and said, "We're not suing them, Mac." He raised an eyebrow. I took a deep breath. "We're ending them." It was week 2, Thursday, 2:15 in the afternoon, and the war had just begun. Saying you're going to end an HOA is one thing. Doing it is another. Mac made that clear. Anger builds a poor case, Tom. He told me over that kitchen table. Proof is a hammer. You need to build a big one. I wasn't an investigator or a lawyer, but I was a lineman. I spent my whole life solving problems with systems and knowing how things connect. This HOA was a system, a broken one, and I just needed to find the faulty connections. My first call was to my niece, Emily. She was a civil engineer, the kind of person who sees the world in blueprints and bedrock stability. I told her what happened, and I could hear the anger in her voice, but she kept it professional. Uncle Tom, she said, send me everything they gave you, every scrap of paper, especially that slope grading violation. My second call was tougher. I had a neighbor, Joe Morales. We called him Tracker Joe. He was a retired Marine who'd done 2 tours and came back indifferent. He kept to himself even more than I did. But I knew one thing about Joe. He had security cameras everywhere, and a drone. He didn't trust people, so he watched them. I walked over to his place, and he met me on his porch. Before I could even get the words out, he just nodded. I saw the bulldozer, Tom. I already started pulling the footage. My last recruit was the quietest. An older gentleman who lived on the other side of the lake had mentioned to me once that he used to be a county clerk. He kept meticulous records. I just needed to know how the HOA filed its minutes and held its votes. With Mac guiding me over the phone, we started building our hammer. We worked out of Mac's basement for the next week. It looked like a command center. Maps, timelines, and documents were spread out everywhere. Emily was the first to strike gold. She took one look at the violation notice and said, "This is garbage." She explained it to me in simple terms. Step 1. A real slope assessment requires soil borings and a licensed geotechnical engineer. They had neither. Step 2. Any imminent danger claim would have to be filed with the county's planning and zoning department, which would trigger an immediate inspection. There was no record of that. Step 3. The jargon they used, watershed instability, was a vague catch-all phrase, designed to sound scary, but it had no legal definition in the county code. Emily pulled up the official county survey of my land from when I built the cabin. It was pristine. It showed 0 encroachment, 0 risk. The HOA's claim was a complete fabrication. But the real smoking gun was when Emily cross-referenced the inspector's license number on the report. The number belonged to a man who'd been disbarred 6 years ago for falsifying documents. It was a ghost signature on a ghost report. Meanwhile, Tracker Joe delivered a hard drive. It was months of footage, and on it, we found pure evil in broad daylight. There was a clip from 2 weeks before the demolition. It showed Lana, her son-in-law Doug, and another board member standing on the road, looking toward my property. They couldn't see my cabin from there, but the drone's microphone picked up their conversation perfectly. Lana was laughing. "Don't worry," she said. "We'll get that hillbilly out. He doesn't even know what's coming." Then Doug added, "I'll make sure the violation report looks extra official." It was a conspiracy, recorded in high definition. The final piece of the puzzle came from the county records. With help from my clerk neighbor, we pulled the HOA's official meeting minutes and their articles of incorporation. This HOA was registered as a non-profit corporation, which meant it had to follow state laws for governance, laws they had been breaking for years. We found that for the past 3 years, nearly every important vote was held without a proper quorum. Not enough members were present to make it legal. They were using fake proxies, signing names of people who had moved away or even passed away to push their agenda. That vote to destroy my cabin? It was illegal. The whole thing was built on a foundation of lies, forged documents, and rigged procedures. Mac took all our evidence, Emily's engineering breakdown, Joe's video, the county records, and he compiled it into a thick, detailed binder. He had me write out a simple, clear statement of what had happened, in my own words. No emotion, just facts. The timeline, the documents, the lies. He looked at me when we were done, the binder sitting on the table between us. Now, most people would take this to a lawyer and file a lawsuit for damages, he said. It would take years. It would cost a fortune. You'd probably win, but you said you wanted to end them. I just nodded. So, he said, with a thin smile, we're not filing a lawsuit, we're filing this. He pointed to the binder. This is a criminal referral. We're sending it to the State Attorney General's office, the department that oversees nonprofits. It was week 3, a quiet Sunday morning. And we weren't asking for money, we were asking for arrests. The Attorney General's office moved faster than I ever thought possible. Our criminal referral wasn't just a complaint. It was an open and shut case in a binder. They scheduled an emergency hearing with a state administrative judge, just 2 weeks after we filed. It wasn't a trial. Not yet. It was a hearing to determine if the state should place the HOA into temporary receivership while they investigated. Mac told me to represent myself. He said a lawyer would complicate it, make it feel like a money grab. He wanted the judge to see me, a regular man whose life was bulldozed. He said he'd be in the gallery watching. The day of the hearing, I put on my best flannel shirt and a pair of clean work boots. I drove to the county courthouse, that binder of evidence tucked under my arm like a shield. When I got there, Lana and the 2 other board members were huddled with their lawyer in the hallway. She saw me and smirked, that same condescending look she'd given me in front of my ruined home. She walked over, clipboard in hand, like always. You really think people are going to care about your little shack? She whispered, her voice like venom. We have the best lawyer in the county. You have dirt under your fingernails. I just looked at her. I didn't say a word. The anger inside me was cold and quiet. It didn't need to yell. Not anymore. The bailiff called us in. The courtroom was small and formal. The judge was an older woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing. The HOA's lawyer went first, his voice smooth and confident. He painted me as a disgruntled resident who'd ignored warnings and endangered the community. He called the demolition a necessary but unfortunate step to protect property values and environmental stability. He made it sound like they were heroes. Then, it was my turn. I walked up to the podium. My hands were shaking a little, so I gripped the sides of it. I didn't talk about my feelings. I didn't talk about Sarah or the 10 years I spent building my home. I just opened the binder. Your Honor, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. This isn't about my feelings. This is about facts and forged documents. I started with the foundation. The HOA was a non-profit corporation, legally bound by state statutes. I showed the judge the meeting minutes, where they failed to establish a quorum for the vote to destroy my property. Their own records proved the vote was illegal. The HOA lawyer objected, calling it irrelevant. The judge waved him off. Sit down, counselor. Let the man speak. Next, I presented Emily's report. I explained in simple lineman's terms how the slope grading violation was impossible without an engineering study, which they never did. I handed the judge the official county survey showing my land was stable. Then came the big one. The inspector's report, signed by Doug Neely. Your Honor, I said, the license number on this report belongs to a man who lost his license 6 years ago for fraud. The signature on this document is a forgery. A murmur went through the small courtroom. The judge leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the document I'd placed in front of her. The HOA's lawyer stood up, flustered. Objection! My clients were acting in good faith based on the information provided to them. The judge didn't even look at him. She was looking at Lana Dorsey. I could see a bead of sweat trickle down Lana's temple. But the real blow came next. The judge looked at the financial statement the HOA had provided. Then she looked at the state's preliminary findings. Ms. Dorsey, the judge said, her voice like ice, It seems your HOA's insurance carrier was contacted. They've stated for the record that their policy explicitly does not cover criminal acts, including fraud and forgery. So if this goes bad, you and your board members are personally liable. Lana's face went white. The final nail in the coffin was when the state investigator who was sitting at the prosecution table stood up. "Your Honor," she said, "as part of our initial inquiry, we subpoenaed the bank records for the association and its board members." She held up a stack of papers. "We have found over $400,000 in misused funds over the last 5 years. Unauthorized bonuses, payments to shell companies, and funds transferred directly to personal PayPal accounts." It was at that moment, in the dead silence of the courtroom, that we all heard it. The public recorder's microphone on the table in front of Lana was still on, and in her panic, she leaned over to her lawyer and hissed, "I told you not to use my PayPal!" The entire room heard it. The judge heard it. The court stenographer typed it. The game was over. The judge slammed her gavel down. The sound cracked like a rifle shot. She didn't just grant the state's request to take over the HOA. She did more. She turned the hearing into a civil RICO investigation, a powerful legal tool used against organized crime. She ordered a full forensic audit of every dime the HOA had ever touched, and froze all their personal assets. It was week 5, Monday morning, 10:30, and Lana's little kingdom had just begun to burn. The news of the hearing spread through our community like a wildfire. Suddenly, people who had been afraid to speak up started talking. When a predator like Lana gets wounded, the herd she was hunting turns on her. The judge's order for a full audit meant investigators were calling every resident, asking about every fine, every special assessment. The HOA members, who had either been bullied into silence or were blissfully ignorant, panicked. They realized they'd been paying into a criminal enterprise. The first rat to jump ship was Barbara Teen. She was the HOA treasurer, a quiet woman in her late 60s who I'd always seen as one of Lana's lapdogs, but it turned out she was just scared. The day after the hearing, she walked into the Attorney General's office with a USB drive clutched in her hand. For 5 years, she'd been Lana's bookkeeper. And for 5 years, she'd kept her own secret, meticulous records of everything. She had backup files of the real budgets before Lana cooked the books. She had spreadsheets tracking the illegal money transfers. But the most damning thing she had was audio. Barbara had started secretly recording the executive board meetings 2 years ago on a little digital recorder she kept in her purse. The investigators put the USB drive into a player, and Lana's empire crumbled one sentence at a time. In one recording, Lana's voice was crisp and clear, laughing with the other board members. "We don't fine 'em to fix stuff," she said. "We fine 'em to sell. You rack up enough violations, put a lien on their property. Eventually, they get tired. They sell cheap. My realty contacts handle the rest." It wasn't just about control. It was a shakedown operation designed to force people out of their homes. Barbara's confession opened the floodgates. The AG's office put out a public call for anyone who had been targeted by the HOA to come forward. And they did. A widowed woman came forward, her voice trembling as she testified. Back in 2018, the HOA had fined her into bankruptcy over the color of her fence, put a lien on her house, and forced her to sell to a company that, it turned out, was owned by Lana's ex-husband. She lost everything. Her story mirrored my own, just slower, a death by 1,000 paper cuts instead of a single bulldozer. The next court date was set, and the state brought in an expert witness. It was my niece, Emily. She stood before the court, not as my niece, but as a licensed civil engineer. She had analyzed the violation notices from my case, the widow's case, and 4 other properties that had been targeted. On a large screen, she displayed the forged compliance reports side by side. "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm and professional, "what we have here is not just a pattern of fraud. It's a template. She pointed to the screen. The metadata in these digital files shows they were all created from the same master document. The exact same phrasing. The same formatting. Even the same typographical error in the word assessment is present in 6 different reports filed over 4 years. She had found the digital fingerprint of their entire scheme. They were too lazy and too arrogant to even create a new fake document for each victim. They just copied and pasted their lies. When it was my turn to speak again, I kept it short. The evidence did all the heavy lifting. I stood before the judge, looked at Lana and her board sitting at the defense table, and I said what had been burning in my heart for weeks. This HOA talks about slope grading and watersheds, I said. You can't vote against gravity. The land is what it is. It's been stable for centuries. My cabin didn't threaten anyone. I paused, letting the silence hang in the air. This wasn't about landscaping. This was about looting. They used clipboards and bylaws as weapons to take what wasn't theirs. I watched the judge as I spoke. I saw her eyes, and for the first time, I didn't see a judge. I saw a person. A person who understood that this wasn't just about property. It was about peace. About the right to be left alone in the home you built. She looked at Lana Dorsey, whose face was no longer smug, but a pale, tight mask of fear. It was week 6, a Friday afternoon. The clock on the wall read 3:45 p.m. And justice was no longer a hope. It was an avalanche, and it was heading right for them. The final hearing was less of a hearing and more of a reckoning. The state attorney general himself walked into the courtroom. He wasn't there to argue points of civil law anymore. He was there to file charges. He stood before the judge and announced that based on the mountain of evidence, the financial audit, the whistleblower testimony, the forgeries, and the video, his office was bringing criminal charges against Lana Dorsey and 2 of her board members. The charges were read out one by one, each one landing like a hammer blow. Conspiracy to commit fraud, multiple counts of document forgery, wire fraud for using their PayPal accounts to launder HOA funds, and even a state-level racketeering charge under the RICO Act. The room was dead silent. Lana's lawyer tried to object, but the judge cut him off with a slice of her hand. The AG wasn't finished. He then filed a motion for the immediate and permanent dissolution of the Homeowners Association. He argued that it had ceased to function as a legitimate non-profit and had been operating as a criminal enterprise. The judge took all of 2 minutes to review the motion. She looked out over the courtroom, at me, at the other victims who had come to watch. Motion granted, she said, her voice ringing with finality. The Lake Vista Road Association is hereby dissolved, its assets to be liquidated and placed into a restitution fund for its victims. Just like that, it was over. The HOA was gone. But the real judgment was yet to come. The judge moved on to my specific case. Given the irrefutable evidence of fraud, my insurance company's initial denial of my claim was voided. They were ordered to pay out the full policy on my cabin, plus penalties and interest. But the judge went further. She awarded me punitive damages to be paid from the liquidated HOA assets, their frozen personal accounts, and a special state fund for victims of corporate fraud. She read the final number into the record, and I almost didn't believe it. $30 million. The number hung in the air, impossibly large. It was a statement, a message that you cannot just tear a man's life down and expect to walk away. I felt a wave of relief, so strong my knees almost buckled. It wasn't about the money. It was about the value they had tried to strip away. It was the price of my peace, my labor, my memories. And then came the moment I'll never forget. The judge looked toward the bailiff standing at the back of the courtroom and nodded. They walked forward, their footsteps heavy and deliberate. They walked right up to the defense table behind Lana Dorsey. I heard the sharp, metallic click of handcuffs. Lana didn't scream or cry. She just sat there, frozen, As the officer said, "Ma'am, please stand up. You are under arrest." He pulled her to her feet, her hands cuffed behind her back. The other two board members got the same treatment. The woman who smirked at my ruin, who treated her clipboard like a crown, was being led out of a courtroom in shame. And as she was walked past the gallery, something happened that I have never seen before or since. The people in the room, other neighbors, the widow from 2018, Tracker Joe, even the court stenographer, they started to clap. It started with one or two, then it grew into a wave of applause. It was quiet, respectful, but it was applause. The judge didn't bang her gavel. She just let it happen. The courtroom doors opened, and it was like a dam breaking. Flash bulbs went off. Reporters with cameras and microphones were shouting questions. The story had leaked. The home destruction scam, they were calling it. It was going national. I saw Lana's face, a mixture of shock and utter humiliation. As the camera zoomed in on her, I saw my niece Emily standing off to the side, a small, proud smile on her face. I saw Mac in the back, giving me a slow, single nod of approval. All the news vans, all the shouting, it was their world now, the world of consequences. But I didn't stay for the news vans. I didn't want my face on TV. My part in this was over. The noise and the chaos of their downfall was just that, their noise. I had somewhere else to be. I slipped out a side door, got in my old truck, and started driving. It was week 7. Sunday morning, just before 6:00 a.m., I drove back toward the lake, back to that raw, brown scar on the earth. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I parked the truck, got out, and for the first time in 7 weeks, I walked onto my land, not with anger or grief, but with a sense of quiet purpose. The air smelled of pine and damp earth again. The bulldozers were gone. The circus was over, and it was time to rebuild. The settlement money appeared in my bank account a week later. It was a number with so many zeros it looked like a mistake. For a day or two, I just looked at it. It didn't feel real. It wasn't celebratory money. It was restitution. It was the calculated cost of what they had taken from me and what they had tried to take from others. It was a tool, nothing more. The first check I wrote wasn't for a fancy car or a new suit. It was to a geotechnical engineering firm, the best one in the state. I wanted a survey of my land so thorough, so detailed, that no one could ever question its stability again. Then, I hired an architect. I didn't want the old cabin back. That was gone. That was Sarah's dream, and my project of grief. This new one would be something different. I told him I wanted it bigger, but not for show. I wanted wider doorways and no stairs on the main floor. I was getting older, and I was planning to stay here until they carried me out in a pine box. I wanted it safe, with a foundation sunk deep into the bedrock and hurricane ties on every rafter. I wanted it built to a standard so high that no inspector, real or fake, could ever find fault with it. Construction started that spring. The big equipment came back, but this time they were here to build, not destroy. The sound of saws and hammers replaced the memory of the bulldozer's roar, and a funny thing happened. People started showing up. Tracker Joe would come by every afternoon with a thermos of coffee, just to watch. Sometimes he'd point out a better way to run a security wire or position a camera. The neighbor kids, whose parents were now free from the HOA's shadow, would ride their bikes down my driveway and help me stack lumber or clear brush. I paid them in lemonade and stories. One Saturday, a group of guys from the local veterans post showed up. They said they'd read about my story in the paper. They spent the entire weekend building me a new dock, better and stronger than the one I'd lost. They wouldn't take a dime for it. They just shook my hand, said, "Welcome home, brother," and left. As I watched my new house take shape, I kept thinking about the other people. The widow who lost her home in 2018. The families who'd been fined into misery. What they'd all had in common was that they were alone. Lana and her board counted on that. They knew that fighting an HOA is confusing, expensive, and lonely. I had the money to do something about that. I called Emily and Mac and I told them my idea. We started a non-profit. We called it Property Watch. The mission was simple. We would be the resource I never had. I used the settlement money to fund it. We built a website with free, downloadable templates for documenting harassment, for filing complaints, for demanding transparent financial records. Emily created checklists, written in plain English, that walked a homeowner through how to spot a fake violation notice. Just like she had for me. We put together a list of vetted engineers, surveyors, and honest lawyers who would work pro bono or for a reduced fee for people who couldn't afford it. We weren't there to fight people's battles for them. We were there to give them the tools and the confidence to fight for themselves. We were giving them their own hammer. The impact was immediate. But the biggest change happened not on a website, but in the county commission chambers. Our case had been a wake-up call for the local government. They realized how easily a small group of bullies could hijack a legal entity like an HOA and turn it into a weapon. The commission drafted a new county ordinance, and the locals started calling it Tom's Law. It was simple, but it was revolutionary. From now on, any HOA enforcement action that involved a fine over $500 or a physical alteration to a property required two things: a public recorded vote of the full membership, not just the board, and a confirmation of the violation by a licensed, independent inspector hired by the county, not the HOA. They had taken the power out of the hands of the petty tyrants. They had made the system transparent and fair. A year to the day after my cabin was destroyed, I was sitting on the porch of my new home. The smell of fresh-cut pine still hung in the air. Mac drove out to see me. We sat there in two rocking chairs, watching the sun set over the lake. He was looking out at the new dock, the sturdy railings on the porch, the solid foundation he knew was underneath us. He was quiet for a long time. "This one's gonna live longer than us, Tom," he said, nodding toward the house. "This and that new ordinance. What you built here." I knew what he meant. The house was just wood and nails. The law was just words on paper. What we really built was the idea that you don't have to roll over. That one person, with the right proof and the refusal to be a victim, can tear down a crooked system and build something better in its place. They bulldozed my house. They built my purpose. And I kept the receipts. Justice isn't complicated. It's just rare. But when it shows up, people remember. HOA Karen lost her clipboard, and we got our peace back.